Before we get started, I want to explain how you can be a part of this webcast. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the event. If you have a question, simply type it into the Q&A window at the right of your screen and click Submit. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question is not selected, then we'll reach out to you directly. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Barry Angel is the CTO and co-founder of Juriba. Barry has also served in various product management, project management, consultant, and service delivery roles, including at JPMorgan Chase, where he ran the desktop estate in Europe for a number of years. Corey Balco is a senior architect in BDNA Solutions and Alliances team. Prior to BDNA, Corey worked at True Technologies as a senior solutions director, and he was at Dell in various technical roles, the last one being an enterprise architect. Last but not least, Ross Sorensen is a master architect at HP. His focus has been on the migration of IT infrastructure, systems, and business applications across local and global enterprise companies. Ross was also the Pursuant Solutions Architect for Microsoft Private Cloud, also at HP. Okay, let's kick it off with our first poll today. Are you planning an IT migration in the next 12 months? You can provide your answer in the bottom right of your screen in the polling section. If you do not see the polling section, please provide your answer in the Q&A section. Thank you so much. We'll wait a few seconds for everyone to answer the poll. And while we wait for you to answer, just a friendly reminder that if you do have a question at any time during the presentation today, feel free to enter it into the Q&A window at the right of your screen. We'll have a live Q&A at the end of the event. Okay, a few more seconds. Okay, great. Barry, I'm going to hand it off to you and pass it over to you. You could talk to the results a bit.
So yes, much like previous webinars, it looks like there is a significant amount of organizations and attendees on the call that are looking at an IT migration of some sort. So that's good to hear. Certainly we're in a space at the moment where we have a groundswell looking at Windows 10, and looking at how we can accelerate that is an important thing on a lot of agendas right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the webinar by just reviewing and going back a few years. So one of the things that we can do to make our approach or to change our approach for Windows 10 is to learn the lessons from the Windows 7 migrations. And in general, these were delivered over a number of months, but tended to be quite a painful process. And therefore, we wanted to look at some of the top things that we can change to help organizations do this better with Windows 10. So to start the slide, we've highlighted some of the main ones on the left-hand side here. So number one, lesson learned, as always, applications is our biggest blocker to moving forward with any migration program. And what we've done is we've looked at this whole process from the initial discovery through the categorization of what we want to move forward to rationalizing it and normalizing it, so we get to a nice list of applications that we can actually make decisions on, moving it through into the packaging phase, moving it into the testing phase, and then aligning that packaging and testing with the scheduling is all a process that we need to run and rerun over and over again. And if we can make that process efficient, then we can certainly do a much speedier job with regards to getting our users onto Windows 10 in the most efficient time. So application management as a whole is always our number one and top priority. In addition to that, there's also some other key lessons learned from the Windows 7 migrations. So We typically underestimate the amount of time it takes us to do to get our technology platforms right. So be it the gold images, be it the infrastructure that we're deploying the OS from, the tooling that supports that, the platforms that we're moving to if we're doing a hybrid physical and virtual mix. So whatever we can do around that space to standardize the processes that we're going to use to deploy Windows 10 is going to accelerate things this time. Likewise, business liaison. It's a key perception issue that we have with a lot of these projects. If we don't engage our businesses appropriately, then we receive a lot of noise back into the IT department around how we're managing this particular project. So getting that right up front is another key element to the success and the perception of success around these programs. Now, we also have some other key points that come out in conversations that we have with customers. So end user engagement, and another one that's always a cultural issue, but it's something that more and more end users are used to making their own decisions about their IT. We've got better systems in place for service requests and problem tickets and all these kind of elements. So why not do something similar in the migration space? Having the ability for the end user to actively manage and help with their migration towards a green status. Likewise, the command and control center, so having somewhere central that we can manage these things. Again, lots of organizations managed Windows 7 on spreadsheets. These tend to multiply, and it becomes very difficult to manage the projects effectively and look at things like how we're going to prioritize the applications that we need to get ready, which sites are going to hit the right timing, all of those kind of things, difficult to do on spreadsheets. Similar reinventing the wheel, certainly in my previous role at JP Morgan, we used to start from scratch pretty much on every project that we ran, and therefore we're inventing new processes, new procedures, and everyone's off developing their own methodologies. Again, not very strategic, tends to drive a lot of time and cost into these programs, and therefore if we can do this in a more strategic and standardized fashion, that's something that's going to benefit not only this project but the projects that we're managing in the future. And then finally, the whole automation and orchestration engine piece. So quite often we were doing this manually with Windows 7. We were triggering users into groups or machines into collections and actually having teams of people that were doing that. These days we can orchestrate much more of that activity, and that's again a pain point that hopefully we can look to change our approach on for Windows 10. So those are the key things and the common themes that we tended to find with the Windows 7 migration, and these are certainly the areas we're going to focus on. So in addition to the project considerations, there's also some technical considerations for Windows 10. So I'm not going to be spending too much time on this, but just to run through some of them quickly. So again, application compatibility is going to be an issue within our organizations. We need to know whether our apps are compatible, especially our in-house written apps. We might be moving platforms from maybe Fat Client MSIs through to AppV. That again is going to make some of our applications incompatible with the new platform. So having a good process around that is going to be key. Likewise, the infrastructure. With Windows 10, we might be looking at common formats for the applications. So we might be looking to deliver the applications into desktops, into virtual machines, into mobile devices, and understanding how all of that infrastructure wraps together and how we're going to support and operate it post-migration is, again, an absolutely key element of designing and building this program. IE is another one, so whether we're standardizing on the Edge browser or whether we're upgrading to IE 11, we now need to consider the Internet Explorer apps in the same way pretty much as we do the backline apps. They might be incompatible. We need to move them through the process. We need to understand whether they are calling insecure versions of JRE or ActiveX controls. So again, we need to put more process around that. Likewise with the install approach. There's many different ways to install Windows 10. Microsoft's done a brilliant job of giving us more options so that we can either in-place upgrade some devices, wipe and refresh, we can do a physical refresh, we can provision machines on virtual platforms, but we need to decide for every user which target platform and which migration path they need to go through. So again, lots of analysis around the install approaches that A, we need to build and support, and B, that will be a target for our user base. And then finally, looking at the hardware itself. So obviously you've got compatibility issues with some devices. We've got the discussion going on about Skylake processors. We've got differing levels of BIOS that may or may not support certain installation approaches. So therefore, as a combination, we've still got a number of technical considerations that we need to work through. And I haven't really even mentioned things like, obviously, the security policy and permission changes that come along with Windows 10 that we need to revise to support our end user environment. So there's lots of things we need to think about. And this is just here as a reminder of those elements before we look at the whole acceleration approach behind the program. So with that in mind, I'm delighted to hand over to Corey Balco from BDNA, and Corey's going to focus today on how we can accelerate that whole application management piece from discovery right the way through to compatibility testing, analysis and assessment. So Corey, if I just move it on to you, and if you can take over from here.
Thank you, Barry. Hello, everyone. The problem that BDNA solves revolves around the data that we must consume from an enterprise, and it is those systems as well as the data from them that are out of control. Despite massive investments, organizations have little visibility into what they have purchased, what they have installed and deployed, what they use, the compatibility of those systems, such as Windows 10, and finally, if they are secure and up to date. Understanding this data is essential if organizations are going to make effective decisions and drive reliable data into their Windows 10 migration. The cost of not understanding this data is large and growing. Gartner reports that 40% of all business initiatives fail, and bad data is the primary reason behind it. Now imagine undergoing a Windows 10 migration with those odds. Not great. Now imagine you have an Adobe product, and that product has multiple versions installed in different areas of the organization. You wouldn't necessarily know which versions, if any, are compatible with Windows 10. Some of the software within your IT landscape could be irrelevant, incomplete, or at best, inconsistent, making it difficult to move forward with a successful migration plan. BDNA consumes data that an organization already has generated from discovery, security, and procurement systems. We support many different tools out of the box, and it is this data that is aligned to a standard catalog known as Technopedia. And Technopedia is the heart of our solution. It's the industry's most authoritative catalog of hardware, software, and market data about IT. Technopedia not only gives you definitive names, models, versions, editions, as well as other data, but also provides non-discoverable attributes such as end-of-life dates, power consumption, security vulnerabilities, and more. It is this market data that creates additional relevance and context for making more informed decisions. Technopedia can be accessed in one of two ways. BDNA provides APIs to access the catalog, so the data can be integrated directly into systems that require a definitive IT catalog, such as configuration management systems, procurement systems, and enterprise architecture tools. The second way to access Technopedia is through BDNA Normalize. Now, Normalize is the engine for the whole data platform. And what Normalize does is it taps into data from various systems, aligns that data to Technopedia to remove all variation and duplication, and then enriches that data with the market data from Technopedia. Once that's completed, you will be left with clean, consistent, accurate information about your enterprise. Once you have clean data from BDNA, there's no shortage of good ideas on how to use it. BDNA data can be consumed by any tool or platform that requires good data, which is virtually every one of them. From a Windows migration project in Juriba Dashworks, to a configuration item in HP UCMDB, to a reliable asset inventory in HPE Asset Manager, every tool and platform will benefit from BDNA. The real magic, though, really starts when you can apply this data not just to a Windows 10 migration, but across multiple processes. So imagine IT planners defining architectures using the same nomenclature that purchasing does for procurement, which is also the exact same way the assets are discovered and inventoried in your configuration and asset management systems. The frictional cost savings alone demand your attention. Now, the catalog is comprised of two parts. First, we have the base catalog, and the base catalog is what provides you with the taxonomy or the categorical-based structure for every unique product, manufacturer, model, version, and edition. And then it's the content packs, the second part of the catalog, that provide the market data. So when we talk about, from a Windows 10 standpoint, all of the Windows 10 compatibility information is from the Windows 10 compatibility market data content pack. And then also, with the life cycle and support, that's where the vendor can let you know when their products are going to be generally available, whether they're end of life or obsolete, and what that respective support level is. And then finally, the security content pack is where we pull data from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they're a government organization that publishes all known software vulnerabilities. So basically, we pull all of that data in and align that to all of the products in the Technopedia catalog so that we can help you understand where you may have potential vulnerabilities in your environment based on what you have installed. Now, this is a typical landscape of an enterprise as it relates to Windows 10. This illustration shows that organizations on average running 44% end of life in their desktop environment. That is really staggering. And so, you know, when you think of the 18% of software that is incompatible, 40% of it, which is good news, can be upgraded with either a paid update or a free update. So a successful migration to Windows 10 means that all software is compatible and up to date. This reduces cost and risk to the business. Creating a common language captures the answer to a simple question: what can BDNA data be utilized for? We have focused today on enabling a successful Windows 10 migration, but this same data can help with software rationalization, standards compliance, identifying potential security vulnerabilities, hardware refresh projects, and much, much more. And since BDNA provides organizations with a definitive inventory position by removing all duplication and variation, imagine what you can do with this information if you can get your hands on it in a timely and cost-effective manner. So the way this whole solution fits together is we're going to have our different sources coming from the organization, whether that be discovery information, maybe some purchasing information and patching, and we're going to aggregate that data, and we're going to filter out the relevant information from the irrelevant. Now, when I say relevant, that just means the minimum set of data required to provide you with that definitive inventory position. And so we filter out all of that irrelevant information, which is things like drivers, knowledge base articles, hot fixes, language packs, and then from there, we take that relevant information and we feed it through our BDNA Normalize rules engine. Now, a little bit about that engine. So it's a deterministic engine. Today, there's over 30 million rules in that engine, and so when Normalize finds a match, it's a guaranteed 100% match. There is no guesswork involved. So from there, the duplicates get filtered out, and then all of the data gets aligned to a unique manufacturer, product, model, and version within the Technopedia catalog. And then finally, the data gets enriched with that market data, such as the Windows 10 compatibility information and the security vulnerability items. So when you think of BDNA, we're really that data layer within this dashed rectangle. So we don't necessarily care where the data is coming from or where the data is going to be consumed. What we're really focusing on is being able to create that authoritative source for the organization so that you have clean, consistent, accurate information with which to make more informed decisions. Now, the last thing that I want to show you before we take our next poll question is a report showing a few Adobe products along with their compatibility status. So if you'll notice here in this report, I've got several different versions listed for Adobe Acrobat, and then a couple of other products and their versions listed as well. Now, from there, you can glean some important information regarding Windows 10, whether it's not compatible, end of life, or if it is compatible. And then if it is not compatible, what is that next version of compatibility? And so this is the type of information that you can get out of the Technopedia catalog, which is going to be very helpful for not only that Windows 10 migration, but all of those other use cases that we talked about as well. Thank you very much. Dan, I think we're ready for the next poll question.
Thank you, Corey. Great. So our next poll question, if I could, is what is your biggest migration challenge? So is it budget, internal skill set, application compatibility, time, resources, executive buy-in? If you could please answer that question in the bottom right of your screen. If you do not see a poll section, please provide your answer in the Q&A section. And while we wait for the results, Barry's going to have some information about his results. And Barry, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'm not sure I'm the presenter yet. I don't know if Lara, you can give me presenter. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think this is the poll that you were talking about, Dan. So if everyone on the call could just have a quick look at the challenge question and then either post into the chat window or maybe post into the Q&A section, then we can just have a gauge on exactly the feeling amongst the audience as to what the biggest migration challenge might be. And I'll come back to that once we've had a look at how people respond to this same question on our own website. So if we now look at that piece of it, the next section of this webinar is really to much more look into the approach we can take for Windows 10 and how that might differ from what we've done in the Windows 7 world. Now, we've learned from Corey a lot about the ways that we can use data to help drive efficiencies into the application management process. And so what we've been doing on our website is to just collect information from people that are downloading different pieces of collateral. And the key one we want to know is what is the main blocker for you moving forward for Windows 10. And what we're tending to find still is that application compatibility, as you'd expect, is number one on the list. Over a third of participants have said that that's the key issue. However, interestingly, we also have some big issues around project resources, the budget to do Windows 10 and the time for it. And what this tells us is that we have a number of organizations that really don't want to go through the same pain that they did in Windows 7, that this needs to be much more efficient, that we need to reduce our budgets, reduce the time it's going to take, and make it a much more standardized and repeatable process. So let's just look to see what sort of response we're getting on the chat. Okay, budget, app compat, time. an internal skill set. Yeah, so we're getting quite a good range of responses there, and it's interesting. It is not just technical issues; it's some of the other project-related issues. So let's look at how we might accelerate this journey. So the first part of that really is to look at the journey itself. So what we've done at Juriba is that, having worked in numerous of these projects, we've started to look at the different stages behind the project process. And most of our customers right now, most of the participants on this call are probably in this yellow section. So we've reviewed the pain of Windows 7, we're looking at the technical considerations of Win 10, setting up our project team and looking into the different tools that are available to help support the migration. Now, once we've made those decisions, we start to get into the project itself, and this tends to be a circle that we go around a number of iterations. So discovering what we have out there in the environment, categorizing and normalizing it, and assessing it for Windows 10. So what can move forward? What do we need to do to get this user onto Windows 10? It's numerous things. Then identifying, based on that data, the target state for each of those users, moving them into the project itself, engaging with them for things like self-service, email communications, maybe some audit information, and then finally at the end of this process turning them green for migration and moving into the deployment phase, at which point we engage with our engineering teams and deploy the correct platform and applications to the users. And obviously surrounding this entire process needs to be some very robust reporting that can deliver all of the information to the consumers of that information in real time, whether that's an executive who wants a report on the current status of the project, how many we've done, how many are scheduled for the next 90 days, or whether it's someone at a lower level talking about application prioritization or a deployment schedule for a particular site. All of those reports need to be generated easily for the consumers of them, and having the ability to then provide data and that we can action effectively. So this is the journey that we tend to take, and obviously everything that we can do within that journey to accelerate it is going to provide for a better project experience. So where we work at Juriba is really to identify the phases of the project that are most inefficient today and that we can help to drive velocity into tomorrow. And if we look at this graph here, you can see on the left-hand side, discovery, rationalization and assessment tends to be a huge resource drain up front in the project. If you think about the kind of information you're gathering about users, computers, applications, departments, locations, application compatibility, hardware compatibility, warranty dates, lease dates, you know, it goes on and on. All of this information needs to be brought into the mix so that we can actually assess effectively. And as Corey said before, you know, if we can take the application data and we can immediately shrink it from tens of thousands of rows down to thousands of rows, that's a huge win simply by knocking out all of the irrelevant applications. If we can then normalize them, it gives us an application list that we can actually action and start to investigate for moving forward into the Windows 10 world. So that tends to be a significant resource drain on the left-hand side, and we can accelerate that now with the tooling. On the right-hand side, this is where the Juriba Command and Control Center plays. So this really is all around how we manage the project when it's in its deployment phases. So this really is all about command and control. So there's numerous heavy lifting items that happen within these projects, from end user emails to collecting information to rescheduling to liaising with the business to generating reports to orchestrating the deployment. So all of those areas can be handled and facilitated within the Juriba toolset. And that's really where we look to add most value into this process. And obviously, as a combination of the two tools, you really get a much, much more accelerated program, because we're creating a much more data-driven basis for running it. So what we want to do is now just look at our sort of main baseline for running these projects, and that's to create all of this rich data and bring it into somewhere that we can manage the program from. So as I said, there's a number of different feeds out there in your organization that need to be consumed so that we can actually bring together that data and start to look at validating the information we have. So number one on that is going to be around application inventory, desktop inventory, users, locations, application compatibility, the infrastructure capacity. And the idea here is that by creating all of this data in a central place and having the ability to refresh it from the live environment, so that joiners and leavers and hardware break fix events and all the things that happen on a daily basis within your organization are taken into account. The benefit here is that by creating this data and this rich data source in a single place, you can actually baseline your project, you can start to scope it, you can budget more effectively, and you can have a lot more accuracy in your planning because you can start to use that data to do some quick assessments, and Ross will be talking about this later. And really the assessment should be all around, are there any nice, quick, compatible looking users that we can target to get numbers on the board? And so if we can use this baseline of data to analyze and prioritize the applications and the users that we target initially, we can help with the perception of this program, and we can avoid that difficult question we always get asked, which is generally, why have we spent so much money and delivered so few volumes? It's by changing our approach and making it more data-driven that we can actually avoid that question and build a much better perception of the program. So data warehouse is number one on the list, having that data in a central place. What we can then do is start to delve into the different candidacy elements that are going to help drive our project. So we've created a very simple funnel on this slide. So we're looking at, our complete organization to begin with. We're then going to filter it down based on our technical candidacy. So does this user have applications that are compatible? Is the application performance suitable? Is their user environment suitable? With virtual machines these days, we often have users where their Exchange mailboxes in one location, their VDIs in another location, and their home drive might be in another location. So actually consolidating that would mean that this user isn't a particularly good candidate for our initial Windows 10 wave. Once we've done that technical candidacy, we can then start looking at the business logic. So we may have a user that looks nice and green for their applications, but they're sat on a trading floor. Are they going to be a first wave candidate? Probably not. So at this point, we can apply that type of business logic and start to look and filter that down further to get to a point at which we have some very nice candidates that we can target for the initial wave for Windows 10. And that's really the approach that we advocate here. Quite often we'll see organizations that will prioritize the IT department because it's the most friendly department. Well, it's also the department that probably uses the most applications. Therefore, it's actually one of the most complex areas to migrate. Whilst we might have friendly users, we also have a lot of complexity in there. And that can also stall the project. So what we're advocating here is very much to take a more mathematical approach to that analysis. And then we can move those things into the groups of users and applications and start to prioritize those accordingly. So again, if we're going to package 50 applications a week, then if we do these 50 applications first, we're going to get X number of users. If we do the next 50, we're going to get Y number of users ready. And having that ability to really drive velocity into the program. So going through this project funnel is important, but also having the ability then through the funnel to highlight all of the blockers for your project. So we might have users that are blocked on network bandwidth. We might have users that are blocked on procurement, users that are blocked on training, and having the ability to see and surface that information, again, is critical for us to save time on the project migration efforts that we're running. So where can we save most of this time? Well, these days, what we look at is there's a lot of heavy lifting elements behind these projects, and those heavy lifting elements tend to be big teams of people that are managing and passing spreadsheets around. and they tend to be much more in the middle of these projects. So scheduling teams, logistics teams, application teams, project managers, business liaison people. Those kind of people all tend to work and pass information to and from in a very, very real-time basis. And so what we've been looking at Juriba is to see if we can help with that entire process. So number one really is around, can we get the end users to do more for us? Do we need project managers out there doing audits? Can we get the users to audit themselves? Can they schedule themselves? Can they validate the applications they need through self-service in Windows 10? Because our environment is now 3 or 4 years old, we have legacy applications out there, and they might still be installed on a desktop but haven't been used in the last 2 years. Equally, emails. If we've got a migration that's 100,000 seats and we're sending 7 emails to those people, plus we're sending some reschedule emails, we can easily be requiring 1 million emails plus to go out as part of this project. Now, if you think how long it would take to send 1 million emails, that's a significant effort, and having a tool set that can do that automatically, again, is key. Same thing with the deployments. We're going to be doing tens of thousands of deployments. They're all triggered events. They're all pretty standard. Having the ability to orchestrate and trigger those through a tool set is important. And then wrapping the whole application readiness from the packaging teams, the scheduling of the users, and aligning those two things, again, is an important approach change that we can make by putting all this in one central command and control center and then driving activities from there. And then finally, as I said before, the reporting is one of those areas that is often underestimated. But these days, we have so many information consumers that surround these projects, and we can get absolutely drained around resource time generating reports for people that want different cuts and slices and dices of the data. So having, again, an engine that can do that for us is another way that we can accelerate significantly some of these programs of work. So again, this isn't really too much of a product pitch, but I just wanted to put this slide up there and talk a little bit about the Dashworks product. So the Dashworks product from Juriba is designed to really facilitate all of the things that I've spoken about earlier. So the data warehousing up front, taking that data from the rich data sources like BDNA, having it normalized and moving it into the actionable project where we can track all of those activities and do lots of the heavy lifting is really what the Juriba product is all around. So again, just to advocate, if you want to find out more, please check out the website on that. But this is really what we do at Juriba, and this is the product that we've been developing. And so the final slide here really is just all about the lessons and what we can take into the Windows 10 migration. So there's an expectation that Windows 10 is going to be easier than Windows 7. That is undoubtedly correct. However, it might be 60 or 70% as complex as Windows 7. That's still a complex project. You've still got loads of moving parts that we need to manage, and we need to make sure that we've got the right tooling, people and supporting processes to deliver these things in the most efficient time for our businesses and our end users. The second thing here is around spreadsheets. Now, many of us, myself included, have run these projects on spreadsheets, and we all know that it is a very, very inefficient way of doing these things. So again, if we can bring velocity through a centralized and more strategic platform that can then be spun up for the next project and the next project and the next project, the investment in that has to be worthwhile for not only this particular effort, but for future efforts. And then finally, we haven't really spoke much about Evergreen, but we're going into an environment where Windows 10 as a service is the operating model. Microsoft are very much pushing us all towards current branch for business, which means that we now need to be focusing around application compatibility on a continual basis. We don't certainly want to be pushing out updates to desktops that are going to break some of our applications, and they're in a forced cycle. So therefore, having a platform where you can enjoy, and report on all of this data on a continual basis is going to be absolutely critical for us having successful operations in the desktop estate as we move forward into this Windows 10 as a service. we are really going to be starting to look at perpetual projects moving forward versus the big bang migrations that we've done in the past. And it's a complete culture shift. So getting ourselves ready for that is, again, a consideration that we want to make sure you guys are thinking about as you approach your Windows 10 migration. So with that in mind, I'm now going to hand over to Ross Sorensen at HP, who has developed a service around this data, which again is designed to accelerate our journey to Windows 10. Ross.
Thanks, Barry. Need the next slide, please. There we go. So HP's been doing migrations for a long time. In fact, probably a couple decades at least. We have thousands of customers. We've done millions of PCs. And one of the things that Barry touched on earlier on in the presentation were some of the lessons learned. And based on that, it was a struggle for us to walk into a customer, have a discovery conversation, and actually get all of the information. And then we would have those issues, right? So we developed a tool set that would help automate a lot of those things. We looked for a way for us to go out and find all the applications, to find all the web apps, to find all the hardware, and bring all that into one central database and report off of that. Utilizing multiple different partners, we reached out to BDNA for the apps and Dashworks, obviously, for the central database portion of that and the project management piece. We had 1E, Browsium, Lakeside. We have all kinds of different partners that bring key values to the assessment that make it a holistic approach. When we sat down and we thought about an assessment, the one thing that we didn't want to do is just do a high-level assessment of a small 10% of all your applications for this business unit and that business unit, small samplings of hardware, so on and so forth. We wanted to see it all. And so by doing that, what we've been able to do with the assessment is we get all of the applications, all of the hardware, all of the web apps, everything, and it comes and generates a full report that says everything about that readiness of that customer, so that we can make the plans and designs that can help to move that forward at a much faster rate with less impact, and so on and so forth. From the XP to Windows 7 timeframe was so painful that we realized how much pain there was with the migration of all of the different applications, that it made sense for us at that point that we needed to have something that was way more effective than what we had in the past. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we did was we get all of the information from all of these different points. So if it has a database, we can collect the information from it. It all goes to a central point, and we use Power BI to actually do the reporting on that information. So now we're looking at different things. We're looking at all the applications. Are the applications compatible, incompatible? What needs further testing? What can we do to do upgrades? If there's an upgrade, is it free? Is it cost? What about the life cycle of the application? Are applications already past end of life? Which ones are they? Who has them installed, etc.? We get all of this information comes back to this report and presented back again, like I said, to the customer. When operating systems patching, web applications, Java versions. So currently, one of the struggles that a lot of customers have as they move forward with this is Java, in the fact that Java has been standardized as one of the web development tools. With that said, there's usually about 10 to 20 different versions of Java inside of an organization that they have to try to manage, as well as trying to keep that managed and then provide security when that user goes outside of the environment. HP's worked with a couple of other partners that we've actually developed a solution around the management of that Java piece to make that much more fluid and simplistic as we move that project forward. So there's lots of different things to consider when we're going through a project like this. Obviously, we've seen a lot around applications, web applications. Barry touched on the operating system, whether we go CBB or LTSB, and how does that affect us? We've thought through that as well, and how do we reduce the risk is the key. If you are going to go to Windows as a service, which provides you a lot more benefits as the new operating systems come out, so do a lot of new features that you can take advantage of. is that something that is worth the risk? So you have to have a way to actually manage that risk by testing those applications on a regular basis, at least once a year now. And it's the core and prod applications that are critical. So we thought through the same thing and developed a service that literally does that, right? So there's every aspect of this is very interesting from a Windows 10 because it completely changes the game. We have mobile applications. We have applications now that we need to have universal Windows platform application capability so we can do continuum. So the assessment is the beginning of that journey. The reality is that without knowing where you are, you can't really make the decisions on what you're going to do from a planning or from a design for deployment perspective. Can I have the last screen, please? So this is the screen Barry just showed a little bit ago, and I just wanted to touch base on just one more time and reasonings around it. Is we have two different sections of this screen that are relevant. The one is the analysis system, or when we do the assessment portion, where we're finding all of the information about literally everything within inside the organization, different locations, because when we start looking at different locations, we have remote locations, that changes how we would do a deployment to those particular locations as well. So all of that information is relevant. That creates this assessment report that we would come back with, and here's all the applications, here's what needs to be further tested, these are all ready to go, etc. But then there's a second section to that which Barry touched on, but it basically flips into a project mode. Since we have already got all of that data and you have that inside your environment, it literally is easy to move that right over into a project mode and allow for that to continue forward and continue your planning on, as well as the full-blown deployment. The assessment actually gives the current readiness. So again, we go back to where am I today and what do I need to do, as well as how much is this going to cost. We can literally get down to the point where we understand exactly how much we have as far as an investment is going to be for application testing and readiness versus the actual full-blown deployment. Now, Barry touched on this as well with a single pane of glass. So Juriba, actually, what we are able to do is, through the use of some different scripting technologies, we're able to actually manage the system, management system for the deployment. So literally everything is done through the Juriba front end, which is one of the things that HP liked about it. As we go into the different environments, it allows for, again, that single pane of glass, that single project management capability, which is something that's been missing in most of the projects that we've had to deal with in the past. So ultimately, and last is realizing a consistent approach. Again, it goes back to that project management approach. I've been on multitudes of different projects where there have been everything from spreadsheets to homegrown applications, and they just never really seem to hit the mark, where we've had some good success with utilizing the Juriba and BDNA relationship. So thank you very much for your time.
Great. Now we're in our Q&A section, and I just want to remind everyone, if you do have a question, please submit it in the Q&A section at the bottom right of your screen. And we do have a question here. Barry, I'm going to address this to you. What is the one big piece of advice you can give us to ensure that the project is a success?
Okay, thank you, Dan. Yeah, that's a difficult one. I'm not sure there's one piece alone, but I think certainly having been involved in lots and lots of these in the past, I think my key bit of advice would be to spend a little bit more time up front. It's much better to spend 2 months planning and 4 months delivering than it is to spend 1 month planning and 9 months delivering. So if we can spend a bit more time up front in getting our data right, we can then baseline properly, we can drive the project on a data-driven basis, and we can also, play into that numbers game around how we can prioritize that project most effectively. I think when projects go and chase numbers early on, it tends to mean that the actual overall project is elongated because we don't achieve the numbers that we're expecting to, and we don't put in place the repeatable processes that we need to actually achieve velocity. So ultimately, it's all about, for me, getting that baseline correct up front, getting the tools in place to support that, and then preparing your project to crank the handle on the numbers in a repeatable and standardized fashion.
Great. Thank you, Barry. Somebody asked if we will be getting a copy of the slides, and the webcast is recorded, and we will post it to our website shortly after this event. So let's go to the next question. Corey, I'm going to cue you up with this one. How many sources can you normalize out of the box?
BDNA can normalize over 50 data sources out of the box, and they are several different common ones, such as HP Universal Discovery, ServiceNow Discovery, Microsoft SCCM. Gosh, there are so many, Altiris. And so we're always, developing new ones. And so we actually have a place on our website. If you go to bdna.com/data-sources, you can always take a look at what the latest data sources are that we support.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Okay, just to be fair, Ross, have you answer this one if you can. What are the common challenges from a deployment and logistics perspective? How can we address them?
So the common issues are going to be around applications and also around the deployment itself, right? Applications, we've talked a lot about that on this particular webinar, around all of the differences and the complexities and so on and so forth. The logistic part of that is the remote locations. How do we actually do a deployment of a 5 gig image plus applications to a remote office sitting on a pair of T1s that's also got VoIP running across it? The biggest challenges are the remote locations more than anything else, as well as the applications. So how do we address that? Well, we've talked about how we can address that in here with the application side of it, and there's most SI organizations have a factory. We have factories. We've got 5 or 8 factories around the world that literally that's all they do is they rebuild and repackage applications so that they become easy for the deployment, and they work with Windows 10, so on and so forth. But the hardest part is around the remote deployments with Windows 10 and the increase or the fact that it's actually native to the cloud. It allows stuff like Intune or a third-party MDM to actually do the deployments to those remote locations and then actually join to the domain, and then we can actually start downloading those applications, even if it's a trickle approach. Other options is to actually have someone go out there and actually do a hand delivery of that. It all boils down to what makes the best sense for the customer, as well as what the cost structure is for each one of those.
Excellent. Thank you, Ross. Let's take one more just before we're almost at the top of the hour. So let's do this one. What will the biggest difference from PM perspective between Windows 7 over Windows 10? I don't know if, Barry, you want to jump in on that one? What will be the biggest difference from PM perspective between Windows 7 over Windows 10? Or maybe it's Windows 10 over Windows 7. Barry?
Doesn't sound like Barry's.
Okay.
He's having some problems getting on.
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, no, it's a great question. I think in reality, a lot of the problems that we face are similar to the ones that we faced in Windows 7. I think the biggest difference is really the hybrid mix that we're going into. So I think we have more migration paths to handle. I think we have different technologies that we can use to actually approach the migration. And I think these days, the biggest difference is going to be around how we communicate with the end users and involve them in the whole process. So a lot of it's really about maturing how we manage these migrations to a level where we can manage them over and over and over again using the same repeatable and strategic methodologies. And I think that's going to be the key change for me between, you know, running after Windows 7 and sort of rushing it and doing it in tools that weren't really set up for it versus, you know, taking a much more strategic and data-driven approach for the Windows 10 migration.
Thank you, Barry. Great. Well, we're at the top of the hour. That wraps up our webcast for today. Again, this is going to be recorded, and we will post it shortly to our website. If you want to reach out to us, contact us at bdna.com, juriba.com, or hp.com. Thank you for participating.